The skies over vast stretches of the central United States have taken on an unsettling character. Once familiar clouds now form strange, churning shapes, signaling a growing unease in communities that have long lived with the threat of severe weather. Across farmlands, suburbs, and open plains, people are beginning to notice patterns that feel different, more aggressive, more persistent. News reports have begun to hint at something brewing, something bigger and more widespread than what many have witnessed in their lifetimes. Words like unprecedented and historic are becoming a part of everyday conversations as residents, meteorologists, and emergency officials alike grapple with a new reality. Tornado swarms, once rare and isolated, are becoming more frequent, more intense, and more difficult to predict. Over the past few months, social media feeds have been flooded with jaw-dropping videos of spinning columns of fury ripping through towns in rapid succession, leaving behind trails of destruction that defy easy description. It's no longer just a single tornado touching down, wreaking havoc, and dissipating. Instead, whole clusters of tornadoes seem to be emerging at once, one after another, sometimes numbering in the dozens across a single day or night. The term tornado outbreak no longer seems to capture the scale of what is unfolding. Instead, experts are beginning to speak of tornado swarms, a phenomenon where multiple powerful twisters develop in tight windows of time, overwhelming traditional warning systems and stretching emergency resources to their limits. In small towns and major cities alike, the air itself feels different in the days leading up to these events, heavier, almost charged with a tension that is hard to explain, but impossible to ignore. Longtime residents, who once prided themselves on their ability to read the weather, are finding themselves blindsided, with familiar signs failing to offer the early warnings they once trusted. Tornado sirens, once an occasional and almost ritualistic sound during storm season, now blare with an unsettling regularity, fraying nerves and sowing anxiety across entire communities. Schools rehearse emergency drills with growing urgency, families reinforce storm shelters, and meteorologists spend sleepless nights poring over increasingly chaotic radar images, searching for patterns that might offer a shred of predictability amid the chaos. Amid this rising tide of unease, records are quietly being shattered. Reports of back-to-back tornado touchdowns in the same counties, or multiple tornadoes on the ground at once within mere miles of each other, are no longer considered flukes. Even hardened storm chasers, many of whom have built careers around pursuing the most extreme weather events on Earth, speak with a new level of caution and respect about what they are seeing. Swarm events are not just longer, they are more ferocious, more destructive, and perhaps most concerning of all, more unpredictable. It's as if the atmosphere itself has turned more volatile, more eager to unleash its full fury without the usual patterns and pauses that once offered brief moments of respite. The urgency in scientific communities has become palpable. Research teams scramble to capture data during these outbreaks, hoping to make sense of the sudden uptick in swarm activity before it spirals even further out of control. But for those on the ground, the technical details matter little compared to the immediate reality. Tornado swarms are here, they are growing, and they are reshaping the very way we think about severe weather in the modern world. As communities struggle to adapt, a pressing question looms overhead like the dark clouds gathering on the horizon. What is fueling this alarming surge in tornadic activity, and how much worse could it get? Now, before we continue, we would like to encourage you to consider subscribing and liking the video to support us. As scientists and meteorologists dig deeper into the unsettling rise of tornado swarms, one possible explanation begins to surface from the chaos. A subtle yet powerful shift in atmospheric behavior that has been unfolding over recent years. It's a change that may not be immediately obvious to the casual observer but is becoming increasingly impossible for experts to ignore. The shifting patterns of jet streams, those fast-flowing ribbons of air high above the Earth's surface, are emerging as a major player in this new, unpredictable tornado landscape. The jet stream has long acted as one of the key architects of weather across North America. Snaking its way across the continent like a massive river of wind, it governs everything from temperature swings to the development of storms. For decades, it followed relatively stable paths, meandering north and south in gentle waves that were, for the most part, predictable. But now, researchers are observing behavior that feels alarmingly different. The jet stream's once smooth, flowing pattern has begun to buckle and twist, forming exaggerated loops and stalls that linger far longer than they once did. This distorted movement is setting the stage for conditions that are ripe for the development of multiple, simultaneous tornadoes across vast regions. Where once a front would sweep through an area quickly, bringing a burst of storms before moving on, the new, erratic behavior of the jet stream causes systems to linger, feeding off the abundant energy present in the atmosphere. Areas that would typically experience a single round of severe weather now endure prolonged assaults, as moisture, heat, and instability are trapped under stagnant atmospheric patterns. It's like a pot being left to boil without a lid, building up more and more pressure until it explodes, not once, but over and over again. Meteorologists have long relied on the jet stream's movements to predict severe weather outbreaks, but these new, unpredictable contortions are making traditional forecasting models less reliable. Instead of a clear progression of weather systems, the atmosphere now behaves more like a tangled web, where storms can develop, redevelop, and multiply in a disorganized frenzy. It's within this chaotic environment that tornado swarms find fertile ground, rapidly spawning across regions left vulnerable by stalled fronts and endless sources of energy. In many cases, these swarms form under the same systems that simply refuse to move on, creating an endless loop of instability that feeds itself day after day. The implications of a shifting jet stream reach far beyond the theoretical. On the ground, the consequences are already becoming all too real. Towns that once considered themselves on the fringes of Tornado Alley are finding themselves squarely in the crosshairs of these new swarm events. Regions that previously experienced a handful of tornado watches each year now face the reality of multiple watches and warnings in a single week. The weather maps that people have trusted for generations are being redrawn in real time, with danger zones expanding and old assumptions crumbling under the weight of overwhelming evidence. One of the most striking examples of this shift came in the spring of last year, when a sprawling swarm event devastated multiple states over the course of just 3 days. As meteorologists scrambled to issue warnings, the storm systems fed continuously off a stalled jet stream, refusing to move on. Dozens of tornadoes touched down, some within minutes of each other, others forming almost on top of previous paths of destruction. Survivors described the experience as relentless and never-ending, a sentiment echoed by emergency response teams who struggled to keep up with the demands of multiple simultaneous disasters. Scientists studying these outbreaks noted something chilling. The atmospheric conditions were not isolated anomalies, but part of a growing trend. Analysis of satellite data and historical weather patterns revealed that these distorted jet streams had been becoming more frequent over the past 2 decades. Longer-lasting loops, slower movements, and sharper bends in the jet stream all contributed to atmospheric bottlenecks, creating perfect conditions for swarms of tornadoes to form again and again. The reasons behind the jet stream's strange new behavior are still being unraveled, but one thing is clear: the consequences are already here. With each new swarm event, communities are forced to grapple with longer warning periods, higher numbers of tornadoes, and the sobering realization that the systems once in place to protect them may no longer be enough. Even the best storm shelters can only offer so much defense when multiple tornadoes strike the same area in quick succession, overwhelming infrastructure and stretching emergency services beyond their limits. Local governments and emergency planners are being forced to rethink their strategies in light of these new realities. Traditional storm siren systems, designed to alert people to a single incoming tornado, struggle to keep pace with back-to-back warnings. Emergency shelters, often designed for temporary, short-term use, now have to accommodate longer stays and greater numbers of people. Insurance companies, too, are re-evaluating their risk models, adjusting premiums and coverage in areas newly designated as high risk due to the shifting weather patterns influenced by the volatile jet stream. Perhaps most unsettling is the sense of uncertainty that now hangs over entire regions. The jet stream's unpredictable behavior makes it harder to forecast not just individual storms, but entire seasons. Where once meteorologists could offer relatively confident predictions about when and where tornado season would peak, now there is a growing sense of caution. Each new spring brings with it the possibility that a seemingly ordinary day could escalate into a swarm event unlike anything previously recorded, a grim reminder that nature's most powerful forces are no longer bound by the familiar rhythms of the past. Communities are adapting, but many feel like they are racing against a clock they cannot see. New building codes are being discussed that emphasize storm resilience, including the construction of more underground shelters and reinforced safe rooms in homes and public buildings. Educational campaigns are expanding, teaching people not just how to respond to a single tornado warning, but how to survive prolonged severe weather events with multiple tornado threats. And yet, despite these efforts, there is an underlying acknowledgement that preparation can only go so far when the forces at play are as massive and unpredictable as a jet stream gone wild. As researchers continue to pore over data and refine their models, the hope remains that a better understanding of the jet stream's shifting behavior might offer new tools for prediction and protection. But until then, the communities across Tornado Alley and beyond must live with the uneasy reality that their skies are more dangerous than they have ever been before, and that the next swarm could arrive with little warning, riding the erratic winds of a jet stream that no longer follows the rules. The deeper scientists probe into the shifting behavior of the jet stream, the more they uncover just how profoundly this atmospheric titan governs the environment below. It's not merely a matter of the jet stream slowing down or changing course, it's about the cascading, almost domino-like effects that each subtle alteration initiates across the broader weather system. These changes ripple outward, influencing not only where storms form, but how they grow, organize, and intensify over time. One key revelation has been the realization that the jet stream's newfound instability creates vastly more opportunities for low-pressure systems to develop and anchor themselves over vulnerable regions. In the past, the swift movement of the jet stream would push these systems along like debris in a fast-moving river, limiting their time to gather strength. But now, as the jet stream buckles and slows, these low-pressure systems are often left to fester, drawing in moisture from the Gulf of Mexico and tapping into rising surface temperatures without restraint. What begins as a modest disturbance can evolve into a sprawling, slow-moving monster, capable of spawning not just isolated storms, but vast convoys of supercells, each one a potential tornado generator. The mechanics of how this happens are intricate but critical to understand. When the jet stream dips sharply southward, a pattern meteorologists refer to as a trough, it creates an atmospheric environment that is rich with wind shear, instability, and lift. These are the three ingredients essential for the formation of severe thunderstorms and, ultimately, tornadoes. In the past, such troughs were relatively short-lived events, passing through in a day or two before conditions stabilized. Now, however, these troughs can stall over the same area for days at a time, continuously replenishing the atmosphere with the necessary conditions for tornado outbreaks. This creates a dynamic where storms are not only more numerous but often more violent. As each new round of thunderstorms erupts under the same persistent trough, the atmosphere is churned and twisted into increasingly volatile states. Supercell thunderstorms, the primary breeding ground for tornadoes, become more frequent, and in many cases, more intense. Tornadoes spawned in these environments tend to last longer on the ground, travel farther, and in many cases, achieve higher ratings on the enhanced Fujita scale. Even more concerning is the fact that these prolonged jet stream disturbances introduce new variables into the mix that experts are still working to fully understand. For instance, research has begun to suggest that longer-lasting troughs can lead to what some meteorologists describe as atmospheric memory, where successive days of severe weather essentially prime the atmosphere for even greater instability. Each storm leaves behind an environment that is more favorable for the next, creating a feedback loop that dramatically increases the potential for swarm-like tornado outbreaks. In this way, the jet stream's erratic new behavior doesn't just create the conditions for a single day of chaos, it establishes a foundation for an extended period of heightened tornado activity. Regions that would typically brace for a one-day outbreak now must prepare for a relentless series of storms, each one riding the same stalled-out river of wind and instability that shows no signs of moving on. In practical terms, this means a week that might have once brought a handful of isolated tornadoes could now deliver dozens, each outbreak feeding into the next like links in an unbroken chain of destruction. The slow, almost lethargic movement of the jet stream also allows other atmospheric anomalies to develop and interact in ways rarely seen before. For instance, with prolonged troughs comes a persistent inflow of warm, moist air from the south, which can supercharge storm systems well beyond their usual capacities. Simultaneously, cooler air trapped behind the stalled jet stream creates a sharp contrast that acts as high-octane fuel for tornado formation. The clashing of these air masses over the same geography, day after day, intensifies the violence of the storms in a way that many seasoned meteorologists find deeply troubling. Even subtle shifts within the jet stream itself can yield dramatic consequences. A slight wobble northward or southward can shift the focus of severe weather hundreds of miles, catching communities off guard that had not traditionally considered themselves at high risk. It's not just the traditional heart of Tornado Alley that needs to stay vigilant anymore. Places farther east and even into the Great Lakes region have found themselves in the crosshairs of these unpredictable, swarm-producing systems. This broadening of the danger zone has serious implications for preparedness efforts. Areas unfamiliar with frequent tornado threats may lack the hardened infrastructure, early warning systems, and community awareness necessary to respond effectively. Emergency plans designed around short-lived, isolated storms now struggle to accommodate the demands of multiple, sequential tornado emergencies. Entire regions are learning, sometimes the hard way, that a stalled jet stream can turn a few hours of danger into a week-long siege against the forces of nature. Furthermore, the unusual behavior of the jet stream appears to be eroding the traditional seasonal boundaries that once defined tornado activity. While spring has always been the peak for tornadoes, reports are increasingly documenting significant swarm events in what were once considered the quieter months of late summer and early fall. The jet stream's irregular meandering ensures that atmospheric instability can linger well beyond the old norms, stretching the tornado season in both directions and complicating long-held assumptions about when severe weather is most likely to strike. In light of these mounting changes, researchers have begun to rethink how they model tornado outbreaks. Traditional models that heavily weighted the movement of frontal boundaries and surface temperatures are being adapted to account for the jet stream's unpredictable patterns. New forecasting tools increasingly emphasize the upper atmosphere dynamics that govern these patterns, seeking earlier and more accurate warning signs of stalled systems that could lead to swarm conditions. Despite these advancements, the sheer complexity of the jet stream's evolving behavior remains a formidable challenge. It weaves an intricate tapestry of factors: temperature gradients, oceanic influences, land surface interactions, that defies easy prediction. Each tornado swarm event that unfolds under its chaotic influence offers a new case study, a new set of variables to analyze and incorporate into an ever-growing pool of knowledge. Scientists find themselves simultaneously racing to keep up with the pace of change while acknowledging that the forces reshaping tornado patterns are not easily tamed. The unsettling reality is that this new behavior of the jet stream may not be a temporary anomaly but a long-term transformation. If that proves to be true, then communities, emergency planners, meteorologists, and researchers alike must adjust to a world where tornado swarms, once rare and extraordinary, are becoming part of a dangerous new normal. Every distorted curve and lingering stall in the jet stream serves as a reminder that the invisible rivers of air above us wield immense power over life on the ground, and that understanding their shifting currents has never been more urgent. While the shifting behavior of the jet stream stands as a compelling piece of the puzzle, it is far from the only factor experts are examining with growing concern. As the scientific community delves deeper into the roots of these relentless tornado swarms, another major suspect has emerged, one that operates much closer to the ground, yet whose influence radiates far beyond what was previously understood. That second suspect is the changing conditions of ground-level moisture and land surface temperatures, particularly the rising humidity levels sourced from both natural and altered landscapes. As subtle as it may sound at first, the gradual thickening of the atmosphere with moisture has profound consequences when it comes to tornado formation. Experts have long known that moisture is the lifeblood of severe weather, the raw material from which thunderstorms draw their energy. However, It is only recently that researchers have begun to appreciate just how dramatically ground level changes, such as warming soils, expanded irrigation, and more frequent heavy rain events, are feeding into a feedback loop that supercharges the atmosphere and sets the stage for tornado-producing storms to blossom with alarming ease. At the heart of this theory lies the recognition that the very ground beneath our feet has become a more efficient engine for moisture release. In past decades, broad swaths of the central United States, commonly dubbed Tornado Alley, would cycle through wetter and drier periods throughout the year. Today, however, patterns show that these regions are holding on to moisture far longer, saturating the lower atmosphere with water vapor even during times that would have historically leaned dry. This matters greatly because water vapor is the key ingredient that fuels updrafts, the vertical columns of rising air that serve as the backbone for severe thunderstorms. When updrafts are fueled by abundant moisture, they rise faster, grow larger, and achieve higher levels of rotation. The more moisture available near the surface, the stronger the storm can become. And once a thunderstorm achieves a certain critical mass, the chances of it spinning off tornadoes increase exponentially. Meteorologists have observed that in recent years dew points, the measure of how much moisture is in the air, have routinely reached higher levels earlier in the year and lingered longer into the night than before. Instead of peaking during a narrow window of the afternoon, when the sun is strongest, elevated dew points now persist across multiple parts of the day and even after sunset. This sustained moisture availability means that storms no longer have to race against the clock to become tornadic before cooling nighttime temperatures stabilize the atmosphere. Instead, the atmosphere remains primed for hours on end, allowing thunderstorms to maintain their strength and continue producing tornadoes deep into the overnight hours. The consequences of this shift are startling. Nighttime tornadoes, which are significantly more deadly due to the challenges of warning and visibility, are becoming more frequent. Experts connect this troubling trend directly to the persistence of high moisture levels near the surface, creating an environment that remains volatile long after the traditional window for severe weather would have passed. In a world where ground-level conditions favor perpetual storm readiness, the barriers that once contained tornado outbreaks to short, predictable bursts have begun to erode. Further amplifying this effect is the role of widespread agricultural irrigation across key regions of the country. Massive systems that pump billions of gallons of water into farmland may help crops thrive, but they also inadvertently inject enormous amounts of moisture into the atmosphere. This anthropogenic input of water vapor can elevate dew points on a regional scale, tipping the balance even further toward an atmosphere ripe for severe weather. In places where vast tracts of land are regularly irrigated, the combination of warm surface temperatures and excessive moisture can create microclimates that are virtual breeding grounds for tornadic thunderstorms. Natural changes, too, play a role. Increased rainfall across the central and eastern United States has led to more saturated soils and expanded wetland areas, both of which contribute to higher evaporation rates. Even regions that once acted as dry buffers between humid and arid zones are finding themselves increasingly soaked, blurring the once clear boundaries that shaped historic weather patterns. The result is a broader geographic area capable of supporting intense thunderstorms, essentially expanding the territory in which tornado swarms can form and thrive. Perhaps most fascinating and concerning is the idea that these ground-level changes are interacting with atmospheric conditions in ways that are not yet fully understood. Researchers have begun studying how land surface temperature gradients, where cooler and warmer patches of ground sit side by side, may create localized zones of wind shear. These zones can act as invisible hotbeds for storm rotation, helping to explain why some tornadoes seem to form spontaneously and with little warning, even in environments that don't appear especially threatening at a broad scale. This emerging understanding challenges many of the assumptions that long governed tornado forecasting. Instead of focusing only on large-scale weather patterns, scientists now realize they must account for subtle, localized factors tied directly to the land itself. A region's soil moisture content, surface temperature, and evaporation rate can all combine to create hidden pockets of extreme instability, waiting for the right spark to ignite a flurry of tornadic activity. In this new paradigm, predicting where and when tornado swarms might erupt becomes a far more intricate dance. It's not enough to watch for the big troughs and sweeping cold fronts. Forecasters must also weigh the invisible contributions of fields, wetlands, and even small bodies of water scattered across the landscape. Each plays a role in determining how much moisture fills the air, how much energy is stored in the surface layer, and how readily that energy can be unleashed in the form of towering, rotating thunderstorms. One need only look at recent tornado outbreaks to see the fingerprints of these ground-level changes. Case after case reveals scenarios where abundant low-level moisture, persistent high dew points, and warm surface temperatures combine to create perfect storm conditions, even in places where the upper atmosphere dynamics weren't particularly extreme. It is a sobering reminder that the forces fueling tornado swarms are no longer confined to the sky. They are being nurtured and amplified by the very earth we walk on. In this unfolding reality, the relationship between land and sky becomes ever more intertwined. Rising moisture levels at the surface are not a background detail. They are an active and potent driver of the severe weather machine. Every additional degree of warmth in the soil, every extra percentage point of humidity in the air, subtly tilts the scales toward chaos. It's a slow, often invisible process, but one whose effects are becoming increasingly impossible to ignore. The implications are profound. If current trends continue, we may see a future where tornado outbreaks become even more frequent, even more widespread, and even less tethered to the traditional storm seasons of the past. Understanding, monitoring, and adapting to these changes in ground-level conditions will be critical in the years ahead, not only for forecasting severe weather but for developing strategies to protect communities from the mounting threat of tornado swarm events. The deeper experts explore the role of ground-level moisture and warming land surfaces, the clearer it becomes that this phenomenon is not a simple, singular process but rather a vast, interwoven system of subtle interactions, each one layering on top of the other, building an invisible scaffold that supports the explosive growth of tornado-producing storms. It's a delicate but volatile dance between earth and sky, where even small shifts at the surface can ripple upward, influencing the atmosphere's mood in ways that once went unnoticed. One of the more astonishing discoveries in recent field research is how sensitive the atmosphere has become to minor variations in surface conditions. Meteorological teams deploying mobile observation units across the heart of Tornado Alley have recorded instances where localized patches of wetter or warmer ground acted almost like magnets for severe weather. In cases where one area maintained slightly higher soil moisture or a marginally warmer surface temperature than surrounding regions, storms were more likely to initiate, intensify, and rotate directly overhead. It wasn't a sweeping, obvious process. These subtle energy pockets only spanned a few miles in some cases, but they carried the capacity to tip a marginal environment into a highly unstable one within a matter of minutes. This realization challenges long-held assumptions about how and where tornadoes can form. Traditional thinking relied heavily on large-scale atmospheric maps, focusing on towering fronts and massive temperature gradients. But now, scientists understand that a single field saturated after a recent heavy rain, or a patch of recently irrigated farmland under full sun, can provide just enough instability to anchor a severe storm in place. And once anchored, storms feeding off these ground-level energy sources can evolve rapidly, producing tornadoes that emerge almost without warning, sometimes even before broader radar signatures fully develop. Perhaps even more compelling is the way these localized surface anomalies interact with low-level atmospheric flows. In areas where moist ground feeds heat and water vapor into the lower layers of the atmosphere, the resulting thermal gradients can enhance horizontal vorticity, the initial spinning motion needed for tornado development. This subtle injection of rotational energy doesn't happen high in the troposphere, where radar and satellite tools traditionally look for signs of severe weather. Instead, it festers close to the ground, hidden beneath the broader wind patterns, waiting to be stretched and twisted by a developing storm. It's as if the landscape itself is whispering to the sky, quietly feeding it the conditions it needs to give birth to chaos. Further deepening the complexity, studies have shown that not all moisture is created equal when it comes to storm development. The temperature of evaporating water plays a crucial role in how much latent heat energy gets released into the atmosphere. Warmer water, evaporating from sun-heated lakes, rivers, wetlands, and even artificial irrigation sources, releases more heat as it transitions into vapor, providing a much stronger energy boost to rising air parcels. In environments where surface water temperatures have crept steadily upward, the atmospheric response has been noticeably more aggressive. Thunderstorms ignite faster, updrafts surge more violently, and the rotation within storms becomes more organized, all steps on the pathway toward tornado genesis. This chain reaction is subtle yet relentless. Warmer ground encourages more evaporation. More evaporation thickens the lower atmosphere with moisture. That moisture, when combined with heat, enhances buoyancy. Enhanced buoyancy strengthens updrafts, and stronger updrafts more efficiently tap into environmental wind shear, the shearing forces critical to developing the spiraling structures that birth tornadoes. Each step builds quietly upon the last, creating an escalator of instability that can carry a simple rainstorm into a ferocious, multi-tornado producing supercell. And unlike larger atmospheric shifts, which often move slowly and predictably, these surface-driven processes can unfold with astonishing speed. A field that was benign in the morning can, under a few hours of intense sunlight, become a hotspot of instability by early afternoon. A town resting under a blanket of humid, moisture-rich air can go from placid skies to a tornado warning in less time than it takes to finish a midday meal. The landscape itself is no longer a passive player in the unfolding drama of severe weather. It has become an active participant, an accomplice in the formation of the very storms that now threaten with increasing regularity. The implications for forecasting are both thrilling and terrifying. Recognizing the power of ground-level moisture and land surface temperatures opens up new avenues for understanding tornado swarm behavior. But it also highlights how rapidly conditions can shift, how finely balanced the atmosphere truly is when moisture and heat play their intricate game. Predicting when and where tornadoes will strike now demands a level of hyperlocal monitoring that traditional forecasting models, built for broader patterns, struggle to match. In response, scientists are working feverishly to incorporate surface-based data into their models in real time. Networks of soil moisture sensors, heat flux monitors, and high-resolution satellite imagery are being integrated into forecasting systems in an effort to catch these localized danger zones before storms ignite. New research projects, like field campaigns deploying drones and mobile radars across vulnerable areas, aim to peel back the final layers of mystery about how land surface conditions prime the atmosphere for tornadic storms. Every data point collected brings forecasters one step closer to anticipating the unanticipated, to seeing the unseen connections between earth and sky that fuel these devastating swarms. Yet for all the progress, there remains a sobering truth: the landscape is changing faster than our understanding. As rainfall patterns shift, as irrigation expands, as temperatures creep upward year by year, the baseline conditions from which tornadoes emerge are becoming more volatile and less predictable. The old maps, the trusted models that once confidently predicted where and when tornadoes would form, are losing their grip on a reality that is slipping into new and uncharted territory. The atmosphere is no longer shaped solely by sweeping cold fronts or faraway jet streams. It is being molded from the ground up, day by day, field by field, drop by drop of evaporating water vapor. And in this new reality, every patch of soil, every shimmering surface of water, every breath of humid air is a potential catalyst for the next tornado swarm. This intricate, ever-evolving relationship between land and sky serves as a powerful reminder: nature's systems are profoundly interconnected, and even the most unassuming changes can tip the balance toward catastrophe. As scientists continue to map this emerging frontier, one truth becomes increasingly clear: the key to understanding the future of tornado behavior may well lie not just in the heavens above, but in the soil and water below our very feet. Yet even as researchers dig deeper into the more grounded explanations, analyzing moisture levels, soil conditions, and evolving atmospheric dynamics, there remains a growing whisper among some corners of the scientific community, a whisper that dares to stretch beyond the traditional boundaries of meteorology. While many focus on the measurable, tangible variables of Earth's surface, Others are beginning to wonder, could something more elusive, something far less understood, be influencing the sudden uptick in massive tornado swarms? It's a question that drifts quietly, almost reluctantly, through conversations behind closed doors. An idea that hovers at the very edges of scientific orthodoxy, one that suggests that perhaps Earth's magnetic environment itself is playing a subtle but profound role in what we are witnessing. A theory rooted in the intersection of atmospheric science and speculative physics. The possibility that shifts in Earth's magnetic field are subtly altering weather patterns, creating unseen pathways for chaos to unfold. At first glance, it sounds like the stuff of science fiction novels, a concept more at home in imaginative stories than academic journals. Yet when one looks closely at the data, curious patterns begin to emerge. In recent years, geophysicists have noted a distinct and measurable weakening of Earth's magnetic field, particularly across the South Atlantic anomaly, a vast stretch of space where the planet's protective magnetic shield is significantly thinner. Simultaneously, minor but noticeable shifts have been recorded in the positioning of the magnetic poles, movements that, while gradual, represent an ongoing dynamic change within Earth's deep internal engine. The magnetic field is, after all, not a static entity. It is a living, breathing phenomenon, generated by the churning of molten iron in the outer core, an invisible shield that wraps around the planet, protecting it from the relentless bombardment of cosmic radiation and charged solar particles. Changes in its strength and structure, though usually considered only relevant to satellites and navigation systems, could, in theory, have broader implications, especially when it comes to the delicate energy balances that govern the weather. Imagine, for a moment, a scenario where the weakening magnetic field subtly alters the way energy flows through the upper atmosphere. The ionosphere, the electrically charged layer high above the surface, depends in part on Earth's magnetic environment to maintain its stability. Disturbances in this magnetic scaffolding could, in a semi-believable but as yet unproven way, cascade downward, subtly influencing jet streams, storm tracks, and atmospheric convection in ways not yet fully understood. Under such speculative circumstances, the very canvas upon which weather paints its patterns could be shifting, even if imperceptibly to our current tools. If regions of the atmosphere became slightly more conductive, slightly more volatile, it could create localized zones where energy gathers more readily, much like an electric storm cloud waiting for a spark. These zones might serve as unseen corridors for rapid storm intensification, funnels for atmospheric instability that, when triggered, could help spawn the kinds of massive, persistent tornado swarms now baffling experts. Some fringe researchers propose that Earth's magnetic fluctuations could even enhance the alignment of atmospheric charges in thunderstorms, essentially priming storms for greater rotation and more explosive development. In this speculative view, tornadoes would not merely be the result of warm moist air meeting dry cold air, a textbook explanation, but rather the product of a subtle electromagnetic tuning, a hidden influence dialing up the ferocity of storms like an unseen hand adjusting a cosmic control panel. Supporting this speculative idea, albeit circumstantially, is the curious timing of certain extreme weather events aligning with periods of heightened geomagnetic activity. Solar storms, which buffet the planet with charged particles and momentarily disrupt the magnetic field, have coincided with spikes in atmospheric instability, though mainstream science has been cautious to connect the dots definitively. Still, the tantalizing hints are there: correlations between geomagnetic disturbances and increased severe storm reports, unexplained anomalies in radar data, and strange fluctuations in atmospheric electricity observed during major tornado outbreaks. What makes this theory all the more intriguing and unsettling is the idea that if Earth's magnetic environment is indeed playing a role, it would represent a shift beyond human control or influence. Unlike greenhouse gases or land management practices, magnetic field changes are deeply geological, tied to processes that unfold over thousands of years beneath our feet, in the molten heart of the planet itself. If magnetism is, even in some small way, whispering into the ear of the atmosphere, then we are dealing with a force far more vast, unpredictable, and immune to human intervention than anything else currently under study. Naturally, much of this remains purely speculative. Mainstream meteorology has not yet embraced the idea of magnetic field impacts on tornado genesis, and empirical proof remains elusive. Yet the beauty and danger of scientific exploration is that what is dismissed today as fringe can become tomorrow's accepted paradigm, once enough evidence forces a shift. After all, it was not so long ago that scientists believed weather was driven purely by surface conditions, and the idea of jet streams or atmospheric rivers seemed like wild fantasies. What cannot be ignored is the growing sense among some experts that we are standing on the threshold of a new understanding of atmospheric behavior. Whether magnetism plays a role or not, the increasingly erratic and ferocious nature of storms suggests that hidden mechanisms may still be waiting to be discovered, lingering in the unseen layers of the planet's complex systems. In the end, the idea that Earth's magnetic heartbeat might be subtly influencing tornado formation is both a thrilling and unsettling notion. It hints at the possibility that nature's fury is not merely a reaction to surface-level changes, but part of a grander, deeper symphony, one whose instruments we are only just beginning to hear. And so, as the skies darken and the tornado sirens wail once again across the heartland, we are left to wonder, are these storms simply the product of familiar forces grown more unstable? Or are they the echoes of deeper, more mysterious changes stirring within the Earth itself? As we piece together these threads, whether grounded in science or stretched into the speculative, the larger question looms with increasing weight: what does all of this truly mean for humanity? What does it say about our place on a planet that is, in so many ways, still deeply wild, deeply mysterious, and deeply beyond our control? The rapid rise in massive tornado swarms is not just a curiosity for meteorologists, or a series of headlines for news outlets. It is, at its core, a profound reminder of our vulnerability. In a world where skyscrapers touch the clouds and technology fits into the palms of our hands, we often live under the illusion that we have conquered nature, tamed its tempests, bent its will to our own. Yet each monstrous funnel that carves its path across the land tears at that illusion with merciless clarity. Each devastating swarm reminds us that, despite all our advancements, we are still inhabitants of a dynamic, breathing Earth, a world governed by forces that are older, greater, and more enduring than any civilization we have ever built. If the atmosphere is truly shifting, if the magnetic fabric of our planet is subtly weaving new patterns into the weather, then humanity finds itself standing at the edge of an era where unpredictability becomes the new normal. We are no longer merely observers of occasional natural disasters. We may be entering a time where chaos is woven into the daily rhythm of life. The structures we erect, the crops we plant, the systems we depend upon, they were all designed under assumptions of stability that may no longer hold true. And beyond the physical consequences, there lies a deeper, almost existential reflection. Tornadoes, with their sudden violence and eerie beauty, strip away the layers of modern life in an instant. They leave behind not only shattered homes but also a certain rawness in the human spirit, a realization that our existence is, and always has been, at the mercy of forces far larger than ourselves. In a strange way, these storms reconnect us with a truth that modern life often encourages us to forget, that we are not separate from nature, but utterly and irrevocably part of it. There is something profoundly humbling in that. For centuries, human progress has been measured by our ability to shield ourselves from the raw forces of the natural world. From stone houses to steel skyscrapers, from irrigation systems to satellite networks, we have crafted layers upon layers of insulation between ourselves and the unpredictable rhythms of the Earth. Yet as massive tornado swarms grow in frequency and ferocity, those layers seem thinner than ever. They remind us that no matter how many maps we draw or models we build, we are still writing our stories in the shifting sands of a living planet. Moreover, there is an emotional and psychological weight that accompanies this growing uncertainty. Societies thrive on predictability. Cultures, economies, and traditions all depend on the ability to plan for tomorrow. When the weather itself becomes a wild card, when familiar patterns dissolve into unfamiliar chaos, it frays the very fabric of human stability. It invites anxiety, fear, and a kind of existential disquiet that runs deeper than insurance policies or disaster response plans can reach. Perhaps, then, what we are truly confronting is not just a shift in meteorological patterns, but a shift in our collective consciousness. A call to re-examine the stories we tell ourselves about control, about permanence, about dominance over the natural world. Maybe the tornadoes are not just atmospheric phenomena. Maybe they are messengers. Harsh, unwelcome, but necessary. They speak of a world that is alive, dynamic, and not beholden to human will. They challenge us to look beyond our cities and economies, beyond our comforts and technologies, and remember that we are passengers, not masters, on this spinning, breathing sphere. They invite us to consider that adaptability, not dominance, may be the true hallmark of wisdom in the coming age. For humanity, this realization could herald a profound shift in values. If the Earth itself is entering a new, less predictable phase, then our future might depend less on trying to command the environment and more on learning how to listen to it, respond to it, live with it. It could spark innovations not just in technology, but in philosophy, culture, and community. A renaissance of resilience, where flexibility and humility become as prized as strength and ambition. Or, if ignored, it could lead to deeper fractures, between those who adapt and those who resist, between regions that thrive and regions that crumble. In the face of mounting storms, will we choose to build higher walls or deeper roots? This moment, then, becomes a crossroads. A turning point not just for meteorology or disaster preparedness, but for the human story itself. The tornadoes churning across the plains are not merely storms, they are signposts, pointing us toward a future that demands something more of us, a new relationship with the forces that shape our world. And as the winds howl and the dark clouds gather once again on the horizon, the question remains, hanging in the charged air like an unfinished thought: will humanity rise to meet this moment, or will we be swept away by it? If you found this exploration thought-provoking, if you believe it's vital for more people to awaken to the forces shaping our world, we invite you to be part of this journey. Subscribe to the channel to stay connected as we continue uncovering the deeper currents moving beneath the surface of our everyday lives. Like the video if you believe knowledge, awareness, and preparation are more important now than ever before. Together, we can face the storms ahead, not with fear, but with understanding.